Hey guys, welcome back to Vince Vale Customs, and today we're going to do a work in progress video sculpting a new base for this custom Jessica Rabbit Miss Marvel statue that I'm working on for somebody. So we went back and forth with a couple ideas, and what he wants to do is create a base similar to the Bowen Designs Silver Surfer statue, where Silver Surfer's on like a base where on the top of the base is a sort of like a moon rock or like an asteroid type thing. So that's kind of what we're going to go for on this statue. Now, I told him, I said, well, let me go in the garage, let me see if I have anything that's kind of already set up that we can start working on, or I might have to go and order some more resin and then go over to like, you know, Walmart or Target or something and find some dishes that are in scale. But luckily, the way things work out is whenever I cast stuff up, whether I was making those head bases or I need to buy resin for making other bases or anything else for friends or clients, what I'll do sometimes is use filler items. So these are like dog dishes that I have, or dishes like these anti-stick stuff, you know, whatever you got. They come in all kinds of scales. They're smaller and larger ones. So what I'll do is during the time, like if I mix up too much resin on a project, I'll fill it in with like a base like this. So this way I don't waste all that resin, and then I can use this down the line. Other times, as you can see in here, there's like a lot of little filler pieces. So if I have like a bunch of resin that's maybe like this thick, I'll throw a bunch of filler stuff in there, and then I'll create a base like this, and then I just sit on them. You never know if I'll need them down the line. So basically now it works out pretty good. So I went in there, I looked at all the ones that I have left on my shelf, and then I found these two that kind of work out perfect for her. So this is going to be good where she won't topple over, because if you do something this small, because she's so top heavy, of course, because of the hair in her chest, something like this might not support her and she'll topple over. Something like this with these two together and then this being wider, she'll actually support a little bit better, even if you sculpt up a little bit higher. So that's kind of what I was worried about. Now, if I feel that at any point during the sculpt that this is not heavy enough, I can always Dremel underneath here and put in lead weights and then fill it back up. So that's, you know, like fishing lead weights. You go over to like a sports store, or you can go in a sports section of Walmart, grab a couple lead weights, put them in there, and you'll be fine. So that's kind of where we're at. So what I have to do is go in the garage, sand this down, get this nice and smooth, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a bunch of drill holes here, a bunch of drill holes here, mix this with some Magic Sculpt, and then I'll have this part set up overnight. Then, tomorrow, once this is secured, what I'll do is I'm going to drill a hole going in an angle this way, another one going this way, and another one going that way, and then what I'll do is I'll put a thick rod in there, so this way it's kind of like a teepee. You know, it's kind of like a teepee, so this way when it cures, that this doesn't really pop out. Because if you just Dremel downwards, this could come out straight, but if you Dremel at angles, then basically it's not going to go anywhere. So that's kind of what I'm going to do with that. Now, once that's done, the hardest part of this project is making sure whatever I do, she's actually even on the statue, on the base, and she won't topple over or lean. So you got to make sure you get that nice straight line with her. So the way it's going to work is I'm going to get like a hollow brass square rod that's perfect in scale with the bottom piece. I'm going to have it like maybe about this high or so, and I'm going to put Magic Sculpt all the way around it, like, you know, like about that much of Magic Sculpt. And I'm going to make sure she's secured very well, and I'll probably line her up and everything, get her nice and situated. Once that's all done, then I can get my Smooth On Freeform Air, and I can sculpt the moon rock around it. By having something here, when I push the moon rock around, it won't push over to the edge, so it's nice to have something there as well. So she's going to come up maybe about this high off the base, I would say. So I want to make sure that she's secure with a metal rod going downwards, and then that the moon rock is going to be there and everything's going to be secured. So it's a little tricky, but I think once I get past that point, everything should work out very well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go outside. I'm going to pretty much sand this down, get this all nice and even, Dremel this out. We'll come back later tonight. We'll get this attached, let it cure up. Tomorrow we Dremel our angles, get those situated, and then after that we're going to start working on that rod. So I think it's a little bit tricky, but the idea is you want her to be secured for the long run. Now, I haven't tried Freeform Air from Smooth On yet with having something supported on it. I don't know in the long run how durable that stuff is, so I want to just go with what I know for now that's going to be working. But something sculpting around the area that's securing with like Magic Sculpt will be fine. So let me go get this situated. We'll come back, we'll get that attached, and then hopefully and we'll get her all sculpted up.
So I think the best bet is I'm going to use my 2-part epoxy with some red paint just to make sure I mix it up right, and throw a bunch here and throw a bunch here and then slap it together. So this way the epoxy fills into all the holes better. What I'll probably do maybe too afterwards is set it up with one of these clamps and just kind of let it sit there. Because I think trying to put like Aves or Magisculpt here and here and trying to squish it on, it's going to really be a pain, and it's not going to go all the way. At least with the epoxy, it might bleed out. I could wipe it around and go from there. So I think that's my best bet.
So I pretty much, as you saw, got the epoxy on there. It's bonded up really well. It's probably been like 2 hours since then. I just make sure I always leave the cup next to me whenever I mix up epoxy, and I walk away for a while and come back, and I make sure that cup is like really hard as a rock, because if the cup is not mixed right or something and it's soft, then I know that's soft in there and that's a problem. But everything worked out pretty good. So I got some really brand new sharp drill bits, and I drilled in at angles. The only thing is these two right here kind of went through the bottom, but it's not the end of the world. So basically I just cut up these metal rods, and I'm going to get some Magisculpt mixed up, and I'm going to put some Magisculpt in there. I'm just going to make sure these two rods aren't sticking at the bottom, just are up a little bit, so this way when I sand the bottom and even it out, I don't hit the metal. So I don't mind if these pieces are kind of up at an angle, because I got this brand new rod here. It's actually 8153 square brass tube. Give you a little bit of information, hopefully get a little bit closer so you can see. So this is the perfect rod that actually fits on the bottom of the Jessica Rabbit. So this is hollow brass rod. So now I have a fresh one long. So when I'm ready to, I'll make this piece up here. I'm probably going to dremel in here a little bit more, drill down here so the rod actually goes in a little bit deeper. And then I'll put the Magisculpt up around there, so when I even this out and I get her lined up, I'll go from there. Because what I want to do is get a lot of Magisculpt at the bottom down in there, put the metal rod in, then probably have a cup here, sort of like a cup, pour in some epoxy, so this way like this will actually just stay in place for a while, and then I can actually build up afterwards. So it's going to be a little tricky. I got the idea, but it might change. But for right now, I'm going to mix up some Magisculpt and get this all locked into place for tonight. Okay, so it's the next day. Last night, as I was working on some other stuff, I had some extra Aves, so I just put it right there. This morning, I dremeled a hole down into the bottom, drilled that down there. So I just wanted to make sure that when I put this rod in here, it goes all the way down to the bottom and it's really secured. I don't like having rods up here too far, like, you know, in case something breaks. I'd rather have it going all the way down. Now, there's something I'm thinking about how this is going to work. If I build this little, you know, pillar upwards and I get Jessica on there and it's all situated, and then I sculpt the planet around it, maybe the planet actually is going to be smaller than what I need, or it's going to be higher. I'm not really sure. So I decided what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this wall and I'm going to build it up to like right about here or so. Well, you know, like maybe that far, depending on how far I'm going to sculpt this ball, which really shouldn't be that far. So now I'm thinking about it. So if I put my fist around it, so it's only going to come like maybe about up to there. So I'm going to build a hollow wall, you know, like it's going to be like a cup, and then I'm going to close off the top of it. And then what I'll do is I'll sculpt the planet around it, and I'll get this planet sculpted to where I want it. And then this way I'll be able to just drill through the top of the piece, and this will all be hollow in here already. And then what I'll be able to do is probably maybe like mix up 2-part resin and pour it in, get this rod in there, and then this way I can actually line Jessica up correctly onto the planet, make sure she's all even. The 2-part resin will pretty much cure really fast in 5 minutes. I could pop her out, and then I could clean up the top area as best as I can. So I think that's the best way to do this, because without having the planet there and then trying to get her on it is going to be an issue. Because what if I'm a little bit over here and then I sculpt the planet and she's not lining up correctly with that rod? I don't want to have to dremel out that whole rod, rip it out, and then try to do it again. So it's better to do it the best, you know, first. Plus,
having this little like cup in here with the hollow piece here, and then I build the planet around it, I'll actually be able to get the planet exactly the way I want it. I don't have to overthink it too much. And then up the top, that's where I'll fix it up to get Jessica into there. So I'm going to just mix up some more Magiscope now. I'm going to kind of build this cup up a little bit more, and then I'll let it cure up for the day. And then later today, what I'll do is I'll fill up the top of it, and then hopefully tomorrow or the next day I can actually start working on the planet. What I'll probably have to do is drum out some pieces around here too, just so some notches, so this way when I do the freeform air, it kind of bonds to this pretty well. Here, it's going to bond great to this piece here, but I just want to make sure it bonds here as well. So I think that's what I'm going to do. Just trying to think about this, the best way to do it is probably pretty much better to have everything sculpted first and then worry about the rod situation. So that's what I'm going to do. Okay, so it's the end of the night, so I figured let me get this all prepped up for tomorrow. So this is all hollowed out. The top here is Magiscope. This is Magiscope. Right here is some extra Aves I had tonight. I didn't want to waste it. So I went in the garage and I hit this with the drill just to give myself like a little bit of a grab for any of the freeform air I put around there. I looked around this in the light, so we had a little couple pieces I needed to hit with some putty. And I just kind of going over this before I hit it with any primer or anything like that. So now that this is all set up, there's two things why I did this. One is because when I do the freeform air sculpt onto this, I can Dremel through here, and then I can work out the rod and get Jessica situated. The other reason too is it was kind of in the back of my mind, but now I'm thinking about it a little bit more. When you mix freeform air A and B together, the thicker it is, the faster it cures and it gets very hot to the touch. Unlike Aves and Magiscope, which doesn't get hot when you mix A and B together, this stuff does. But it's only when it's really, really thick. If it's really thin, like, you know, little thin like layers like that, you're fine. But if you have like a big ball of it here and it starts curing, it almost gets hot to the touch. Not really sure why this stuff does that. It doesn't get to the point where it's going to burn you, but it's just something to think about if you ever want to use this stuff. So in the back of my mind, I was thinking too, like if I put this big thing of freeform air on here, it'd actually start curing on me before I could do a lot of the detail work. So at least here I'm going to have only that much thickness, so it should work out pretty well going around this. And for those who don't know, when you see the fast part of the video, freeform air is kind of like almost like a marshmallow. I've done a couple other videos using this stuff in the past. It feels and it sculpts like a marshmallow almost compared to like Aves and Magiscope, which is kind of more clayish like. But this stuff is really cool though. It's kind of fun to work with. I like using it on bases. I like using it on like stuff like that. As far as like using it to sculpt custom stuff onto a statue, I don't think it would work very well because I think this stuff sort of does expand a little bit. I did test this stuff out in one hollow project, and when I put it into the hollow statue, but I had like a big hole on back of the statue, so I was okay. I put it in there and it filled it in fine. I was like, okay, it worked out. When I came back after like 30 minutes, it started coming out of the back of the statue. So it's a good thing that the statue wasn't really super thin. Otherwise, it might have blown it up or cracked it. So this stuff can be used to fill in a hollow statue or fill in hollow areas. But the thing is, if it's super thin, it might expand and actually break something. So if I sculpt this out and it sort of expands a little bit, that's okay because it's still a circle around here. So I don't have to worry about it. But we're all pretty much set up. So tomorrow what I'll do is I'll get a chance, sit down, and just start sculpting and get this situated. And then after that, we can start prepping Jessica onto the top. Alright, it's the next day, and I went out to the garage and I dremelled out this piece. So now, life is going to be a lot easier to actually fill this in and set Jessica up onto it instead of trying to do it up there and get a rod in there. So, this is the hollow brass rod. So what I did is I cut it off, and then I cut a piece here, and I crimped the bottom of this piece here. So now this goes there just below the top piece here, because I think after looking at the way Jessica is, I might have to drum out a little bit more. I want her feet situated where they're actually like, you could tell where you do it. Because if you just have the rod up top like this, and you put Jessica in, and you put her the wrong way, maybe she won't line up correctly. So I need to have like a foot imprint in here anyway. So I have to think about that. So like I said, I might have to go in there and drum a little bit more. But this piece goes all the way down there like so, and it's just below the very top of this area so I can make the imprint. Now, the other thing is, the reason why I crimped the bottom of this is I found in the past that if you use 2-part resin and you pour it in and you put this in there and you mess up, sometimes what happens is if you pour the resin too high up, the resin will come through this tube and it'll actually hit the piece that you're putting in there, and then it bonds together. The other thing too is if I put Magisculpt or A's down here and I put this in, the Magisculpt and A's goes there, and it's just sort of the same thing. If you put too much in there, it squeezes all the way up, it hits the rod that is in your statue. So what I like to do now is crimp the edge. This way when I squeeze it down there, it doesn't go up into the rod and cause issues. This rod is really sturdy, especially once you get like A's or Magisculpt in here, it works. Now, I don't have any resin. I ran out completely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix up a lot of Magisculpt, because I'd rather have this really secured more than resin, because the Magisculpt will be really durable. So I got to mix up a lot of Magisculpt, really pile it in there, and then push this piece down there and sort of get Jessica in there. So what's going to happen is the piece is going to be a little bit lower than the very top of it, and then once I get Jessica's footprint in there and secured and lined up, then what I'll do is I'll make another crater here for her feet, so she kind of goes into the crater a little bit. I think that's kind of the best bet, because I really want to make sure she's secured. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in the garage again, make sure that wherever I put her foot with this rod, it lines up. If I have to drum out a little bit more, I will. And then after that, I'm just going to have to mix up a lot of Magisculpt and just keep piling in there, and then squeeze this down there and get her lined up. Now, the only problem with the Magisculpt is I got to do this over like an hour to 2 hours time, is to keep playing with it and lining her up. Because with resin, you put it in there, you line her up, you hold her, and in like 5 minutes the resin's cured, you pop her out and it's ready to go. And this cures up really good and solid. With the Magisculpt, you got to wait for a while to kind of let it cure. But by doing it and just making sure it's lined up every every half hour to about that 2 hour point, that 2.5 hour point, it should be lined up to the point where I can actually just let it cure up and then it's ready to go. Worst case scenario, if somehow I mess up with the Magisculpt and she's not lining up correctly, I can always go in with a really good brand new drill, and I can drill through this, and this will all come out, and then I can make another hole. I just won't go as deep. I could kind of drill it to here and then make one up to there with the Magisculpt. So as long as this is filled with Magisculpt, I can always make sure that it's going to work out correctly. But everything worked out good. This freeform air cures up really sturdy. It's weird. It's like when you sculpt with the freeform air, it's very soft and it feels like a marshmallow. But then when it cures up, it's really hard as a rock. So it's not bad. But I'm still a little bit concerned that it wouldn't be as strong as like Magisculpt. But I got to do more testing on other stuff down the line. So I'm gonna go to the garage, make sure this is set up, and then I'm gonna mix up the Magisculpt, pile it in there, and then see if I can get this lined up today. Okay, so what I did is off camera, when I first put this in, I realized that the rod was up a little bit too high. I couldn't create the crater because I would have to really Dremel out a lot more because of the way her feet are lined up with the rod. So I decided it was better to just sort of fill up the the Magic Sculpt higher, and then give feet impressions. So this way you know where she goes into the statue. And then I used my cloth again. I brought back the texture. I think that's best bet, because if I try to create the, sort of like the crater like this in there, the problem is it's still rounded and her feet don't line up that way, especially trying to be centered, because I really want her to be as centered as possible. So I decided to go this route. And I know, whenever people design statues or you customize statues or you're even a company producing, you want your statues to be like as perfect as your drawing and stuff. But the problem is you have to think of engineering and production. If we go this route, is it going to be secured? Is it going to topple over? Will it break? So that's kind of what I'm thinking about here. So I'd rather have feet impressions on here so you know exactly where she lines up than to try to do it another way, and then somebody who has it, or the client I give it to, or if he sells it down the line, somebody puts it in wrong and she's at an angle or she topples over. So I'd rather have it a safe bet this way. So I think that's what I did. So as you can see, the rod is in there nice and secure now. We got 2 feet impressions. And once it's painted up, it should all come together. So what I'm going to do now is let this cure for about a good 20 minutes. I'm just going to really let this cure up. I'm not going to mess with it. Magic Sculpt, my Magic Sculpt is pretty old right now. I've had it for a good over 6 months. And so, like, after you open it up and stuff, it sort of kind of cures and gets tougher a little bit faster than normal. So what I'm just using now is baby powder, and I'm just kind of making sure she lined up. Now, if you saw me turning it like this in the camera, what I was doing is I was making sure she was lined up in like all directions, because if you look at one direction and you're like, okay, she's lined up, but if you don't turn it here, she might be turning to the right or the left or something. So you got to keep making sure you turn and everything's lined up. So 20 minutes now, I'll come back, I'll look at it again, and then like in 40 minutes, we'll look at it again, an hour. So hopefully within the next 3 hours, this will be cured up. And then what we'll do is we'll come back later tonight, because we're like really early in the morning now. This should be as hard as a rock, and we can put her on top. Look how she's how it's all set up, and then go from there. Okay, guys. So it's been about 10 hours since I worked on this morning. This Magic Sculpt is nice and hard as a rock, so everything worked out pretty good. Now within that 2-hour period, I kept on putting Jessica in to make sure that she was lined up correctly and there was no wobbling or anything. One of the things you got to be careful though with this type of setup with that metal rod in there, the hollow rod, is that if you put a figure in there and you kind of push her around and then you keep wobbling and you're doing this, the problem is you'll start getting all the Magic Sculpt or A's or whatever you're using to go around the rod instead of bond to the rod, and then you'll get a wobbling effect. So if anytime you do this, you want to make sure you push down the Magic Sculpt so it locks it into place again and stuff in case you mess up. So that's one of the things you got to be kind of careful. Make sure like when you put the piece in there, you pull it straight out and you don't kind of like bend it this way or pull it this way. Then you start getting all that wobbling stuff. So she goes into the base pretty great now. I mean, she locks in with her feet and there's really no wobbling or anything effects, and she's nice and secured onto the base. Now, one of the things with her I realized by working on her so many times now is if you try to line up this leg straight, she leans forward. If you're looking at her this way and you try to line up this leg, she leans this way. So you have to actually line up between her legs to her hip to her shoulders. So that's kind of like how you have to work on this. You have to line this going straight up this way to this way. If you try to line up her head going forward, she goes forward. If you try to line up the head too much, she goes backwards. So it's just one of those things you got to kind of look at the center of gravity of the whole entire piece. Because if you try to line up this leg straight, she leans this way. If you try to line, so you have to come between the legs, up the back, into the spinal cord and all that stuff. So you got to just kind of keep in mind with something like this that it's not the leg you're working to make it straight, it's actually the whole entire torso and the whole bone structure. So it's kind of a little tricky with Jessica Rabbit. Other statues that sort of have like that straight leg, and then you could kind of work it a little bit easier, but because she has like her legs kind of bent this way and then the ankle and stuff comes that way, is that animated look, so you got to be a little bit tricky. So the next step is tomorrow I'm going to go into the garage, I'll prime it all out, I'll start fine tuning and sanding it down. I'll probably get the base painted up before I finish the figure, because the figure still got a couple more cleaning and a little bit more custom work. But at least we can get this base all finished out. But I'm pretty happy with it. It's really heavy now. We have no issues with the weight. She really is secured. And the other thing too is by putting this base here, it really made me happy and it really made me feel comfortable because it's not going to like topple. I think if it was just this base here, we would just risk some toppling. But because this is bigger and heavy, it's pretty good. So that's pretty much where we're at. So tomorrow I will get this primed up, and by the next step when we come back, we should be ready to start painting it up. Okay, sort of a small update on this. So, because I squeezed these two bases together really well, and a lot of the epoxy went around the edge and I cleaned it up, and then I also used a lot of filler primer to really been cleaning this up. I got a nice good closed gap so there's nothing really open between the two bases, so that's good. So what I've been doing is sanding it down and getting smoothed out, but there was a spot here and a spot here that was driving me nuts. This is an old resin base that I must have used up a bunch of resin before the winter, and I threw a lot of chunks of like Aves or Magisculpt in there or other types of resins in there just to kind of use as a filler. And what happens is if you get a chunk of, you know, when you put this in the pot, what you do is if you throw a thing of Aves or Magisculpt and it floats to the bottom of this, and then when you turn around and sand it, what happens is you get a really thin layer of resin over the Magisculpt or the Aves. And then when you sand that down, what happens is it gets so thin, sometimes that flakes off the Magisculpt or the Aves piece, because even though it's bonded to it, it doesn't bond 100% like if you're pouring resin on resin. Like, you know, smooth on resin, fresh resin mixed up together and stuff. So what happened is every time I put the putty on, the Tamiya putty, and I sanded it down and I ran my finger, I would feel it come down and around. So after I sanded, more flaking would come off. So I decided, you know what, just go in there with a Dremel tool and Dremel off all the parts that would flake, giving myself a nice little like grinded area. And then what I did is I mixed up Bondo and I just kind of squeezed some Bondo around the edges there, and I squeezed some Bondo underneath here. Not a fan of Bondo because it smells really, really bad. I just hate the fumes. And I don't like using Bondo in the winter because I got to do everything in the garage. In the summertime, it works out really well if I'm doing like, you know, a really large base and I need to get a lot of flat areas or fill in a lot of bubbles. I like Bondo, but I don't use Bondos on statues or anything like that. Only because I guess back when I first started the hobby, it must have been like a really cheap resin statue, almost like that white powdery feeling resin, and I used Bondo on it when I was first getting into it, and there was a weird chemical reaction, and it just sort of kind of reacted to the resin and sort of kind of, I don't know what it was, but it doesn't really react to like smooth on 300 resins, but I guess ever since then I just stay away from Bondo unless I'm doing a base like this. So I did this Bondo little patching here and here. It's almost pretty much cured up. It doesn't take long, especially if you have it like in a warm area. It's getting cold out in the garage, so it would take a lot longer to cure, but I'm kind of hitting it with a blow dryer and just making sure it go there. So I'll sand this down. I'm going to get this nice and smooth again with another coat of primer today. I'll check tomorrow again with another coat of primer, get it smooth. And then I'm probably going to pick up a can of Duplicolor flat paint, black paint, because we're going to do flat black on the bottom, and then this is going to be like a gray moon rock, and then she's going to be up top. Now, because Miss Marvel, we decided we're going to do with a latex black outfit. I don't want a shiny outfit fighting with a shiny base. I want this to be flat so the eyes go to Jessica and not the base. So that's going to be just flat black, and I think a can of Duplicolor primer will just get a nice good coating on it and should be ready to go. So I'll get this set up. We'll get it the black paint on, and when we come back, we should have it masked off where I could do the moon rock, and then we'll be done. Okay, so yesterday I pretty much got the flat black on here. It came out nice and smooth, and I like the way it looks. It's not super shiny. It's not too dull. It's got a nice satin finish, and it's not going to take away from Jessica, especially once we paint up this piece. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just going to get the bottom of this painted up. I don't like trying to spray the can on here and going in this direction and then get this weird overspray here. What I like to do is go on my airbrush booth and put this at an angle and spray black paint going in this direction. Then I turn it and spray it again. So this way my airbrush booth sucks in all the dust at the bottom of it and I don't get any overspray. It's easier that way than trying to do it with a spray can and getting this all messed up. What I'm doing right now though is this is foam with it's like a sticker basically. This is what I've been using a lot on my bottom of the bases. Now I could put like a square here, square there, like, you know, you see on regular statues, but what I like to do is I like to do a complete circle.
You can pick these up at hobby stores and stuff. And this way, by putting a big circle of a foam underneath of here, this way if you turn it or anything, you really don't risk any of that foam coming off. Because if you put one here, 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 and here, if this rubs off or gets stuck, then all of a sudden you're getting this toppling effect and it's just annoying. I'd rather do a whole big thing around here so it's nice and secured. So that's pretty much where I'm at right now. So I'll get this cut out. I'm going to get the bottom of this painted. We'll come back tomorrow. We'll mask this off. We'll finish off the rock. And then that's pretty much the end of the base. And I could get back to focusing on the figure. Okay, so I masked this off with a Silly Putty. And then after that, I wrapped my saran wrap around the piece there just to make life easier. Making sure everything is set up okay. So what I did is I put this on a turntable and make my life easier. This right here is a blue-gray mixture of paint. I just pulled it off the shelf. So all I'm going to do is just dry brushing. I'm just going to dry brush around the rock, and I'm going to make it look like a moon rock. The idea is I still want to keep that animated look. So I do have another color that's got a little bit more blue into it. I might pull that off the shelf too. But that's where I'm going to go with this. Looking at the Bowen Designs one, it's very detailed, it's very realistic looking and stuff like this, but since she's more of an anime character, I want to try to stay as anime as possible. So I'm going to let a lot of the black show in areas. Now if I feel that when I do my dry brushing, if the inside of these areas are too like black paint, what I might do is I might pull it back out with some airbrush, but we'll see how that goes. I tried to make sure I hit as many places as possible so no primer sticks out. If this was more of a realistic type of a paint up, I wouldn't mind if that primer kind of shows, adds a little bit more color and life to it, but especially with anime stuff, usually it's just one color most of the time with black drawings, so that's kind of what I'm thinking about. So I'm just going to do that real quick, and then after that I'll probably flatten it down because it might look a little too shiny with some of these paints, and then we'll see how we go from there. Alright, so I pretty much did the dry brushing on it. It's kind of where I really wanted it to be. Right now it still feels a little too shiny only because it's still semi-wet, plus these paints don't really dry flat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit it up with this Mecha Varnish matte, dull it down, and I think that should really bring the base together for when I do the figure, because like I said, she's going to be a latex outfit. You want the eyes to go to her, you don't want it to go to the base. So I think that's as light as I really want to go. Any lighter, I think it'll bring your eyes down too far. But when you're looking at her, you're going to see the yellow hair and you'll see the yellow symbol on her chest, and the red sash. So your eyes are definitely going to go more toward the figure, but at least this gives you an idea that it's got that half a planet, moon rock at the base. So let's dull this up. I'll send pictures to the client. It all looks well. We'll come back and then we'll finish out the video. Okay, she's all finished up. Send pictures to the client. He likes it, and we are good to go. She's nice and secured, and it's definitely got a lot of weight to it, so it's definitely going to hold her up. Now, anything could change between now and when I finish painting Jessica, because sometimes painting the base first and then putting the painted figure on it afterwards, you realize that the base may be too light, it's too dark, there's too much color contrast or whatever it is, so things could change between now and when I finish her up. So once I get her done and I send pictures to the client, you might say, well, the moon rock is a little too light, let's darken it up. Or they might say, well, it's too dark, let's lighten it up. Or they might say, well, you know what, I saw the Captain Marvel bases you've done where it's kind of like that lava rock in between them. Maybe I want that on the base instead. So, there's a lot of options that can happen between now and then. But at least this is a straightforward video to give you guys an idea. So, if you're working on a garage kit, you're working on a custom statue, or say you just have a bunch of regular statues out there that are removable from the bases, but you want to cut down the bases because maybe the bases are way too elaborate, they're too big, and you want to just make some generic circle bases or some tiered bases just to save some more room in your collection. Basically, you could just go out, you can get yourself some mold release from Smooth On. I think these cans are like around $12 to $18, I forget. You get yourself a couple of these tins, dog dishes. You get these at Walmart, Target for like, I don't know, anywhere from $3 to $6 or whatever. And then you get yourself 2-part resin, you pour it in. Once it cures up, you sand it down, and then you could start making layered tiers or just circle bases for your items. So I will link in the description on how to make generic bases. I did a video on this a while back. It'll give you guys an idea of how resin works and how you can make some generic bases. But that's pretty much the same thing. These are just two-tiered pieces like this, just smaller scale, attached together, and then something sculpted on top, and then the custom statue on that. So hopefully gives you guys an idea. Maybe you could go out there and attempt some stuff on your own. Maybe you can cut down your collection or just make up some new bases for some statues you're working on. So let me know what you guys think. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back with some more videos.